You don't know my story. You don't even know my pain. No, I'm not complaining, but I just want to give God praise. Saying you don't know my story. So you don't know. You don't even know my pain. So you don't even know my pain. No.
Good evening, and welcome to the Nobody Asks Me Guys show. Guys, I'm your host, Melvin Casey Lars. And as we always try to get you guys to understand, is that we are an educational podcast. We don't waste your time pontificating about other people's business and all that kind of trash. We don't have time for it. Because if you're like me, I have enough trouble just keeping myself in line and then to worry about somebody else. So we try to keep it rolling. Well, guys, listen, this evening, we have with us, as always, a fantastic guest in the person of Lieutenant Colonel Elder Samuel L. Mckinsey. Now, guys, as we share a little bit about you, Elder Mckinsey will share more, but Elder Mckinsey has been happily married to Caroline Mckinsey for 22 years. They have 4 beautiful girls, Naomi, Rahima, Hannah, and Hope. Now, for our local guys, he graduated from Bossier High School in 1995, and I'll forgive him for that. I'm a Charlotte Mitchell Airline High School grad, but I'll forgive him for being a Bossier Bearcat. And he enlisted in the United States Air Force. After 2 years in the Air Force as a pharmacy technician, he applied and was accepted to the United States Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Eric Mckinsey earned his commission from the United States Air Force Academy with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology in 2001. He graduated from Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training in 2003 and went on to become a B-52 bomber pilot. Additionally, he served as an air liaison officer, deployed multiple times to Iraq and to Afghanistan, and his career culminated as a commander of an air support operations squadron. He retired as lieutenant colonel after 20 years of service in July 2019. After retiring in 2019, Elder Mckinsey entered full-time ministry in the Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. Elder Mckinsey answered the call to ministry as a teenager and built ministry experience teaching Sunday school and Bible study, and serving as an associate pastor in several churches. Additionally, he earned his Master's of Arts in Religion from Liberty Theological Seminary in 2011 and Master of Divinity from Phillips School of Theology at the Interdenominational Theological Center in 2022. Now, Elder Mckinsey's first charge as a pastor was Pine Hill CME Church in Haynesville, Louisiana. During his time at Pine Hill, the church added a 1,500 square foot facility used as a food pantry, headquarters, educational space, and community meeting facility. That facility was acquired and renovated debt-free. Additionally, at the onset of COVID and in the aftermath of Hurricane Laura, Pine Hill partnered with the Northwest Louisiana Food Bank to provide over 50,000 pounds of free food assistance to Claiborne Parish residents under his leadership. Pine Hill Food Pantry will distribute over 85,000 pounds of free food to underprivileged families during his final 2.5 years as pastor. Now, Elder Mckinsey currently pastors Evening Star CME Church in Cullen, Louisiana, where attendance and technology use have increased and the sanctuary has been upgraded under his leadership. He also gladly serves as the presiding elder of the Shreveport district, where the focus is sharing Christ and building connections. To God be the glory for everything that God has done in the life of Elder Mckinsey. Now, guys, especially the guys that's always here with me, you know how we do it. We don't waste your time. We just get this thing rolling. So, Elder Mckinsey, as we get ready to roll, sir, we just want our audience to hear again. Yes, you guys did hear me correctly. The brother is a B-52 bomber and a elder, pastor, whatever you guys might want to call it. So, Elder Mckinsey, good afternoon, yes, and we're glad that you're here, sir.
Glad to be here.
Well, listen, it's great having you here. And if you'd like to expound a little more on something that we may have missed, please share it right now. We'll move this thing forward. And if not, we'll keep it right on moving.
Let's keep it moving.
Okay. Well, listen, let's first start. I want to start us with, talking about being a B-52 bomber, because the minute I said that, thumbs start going up and stars start going up and that kind of thing. What interested you in becoming a pilot? So I'll just say pilot, so we can say this a little gently for people that may be a little queasy about war or whatever. What was your basic interest in pursuing that?
Well, let me say this. I grew up probably 5 minutes from Barksdale Air Force Base, and I saw B-52s flying overhead all the time. Right. I even had a tour of a B-52 when I was in high school. Not once did it ever cross my mind that I would be a pilot. Even after all of that exposure, my goal was to either be a lawyer, a doctor, something that made a lot of money, and pilots do make a lot of money, but I didn't have that exposure to it. But here's where that changed. When I applied and I was accepted into the United States Air Force Academy, they produce a lot of pilots. But even then, my whole first year, my goal was medical school by the time I got to that point. Here's where it changed. They had original Tuskegee Airmen come and visit the Air Force Academy, right? These were the first African-American pilots back then in the Army Air Corps that proved all those theories that said our brains were too small to fly. They proved all those theories wrong. And right, so when it came to the opportunity my senior year, after I met him my sophomore year, I started thinking about it. And for me, it was, if for the price that they paid for me to have the opportunity and not take it, right, was just something that I couldn't fathom. And at that point, I committed to going pilot training in honor of what the Tuskegee Airmen did. And that is where my, we'll say, love for flying started, was just meeting those men, those role models.
Wow, that's fantastic. And listen, I have a treat for you a little later, Elder. I'm going to introduce you to Mrs. Elaine Eason Steele and Mrs. Anita Peak. Their dad was a Tuskegee Airman, and they still run the Rosa and Raymond Parks Institute for Self-Development in Detroit. And so I want you to have the opportunity to meet them. So we're going to make that happen.
I would love to.
Well, fantastic. Well, listen, you mentioned initially thinking about going into the medical field. I see where you were involved in psychology and those kinds of things. And we heard you say the shift came in meeting the Tuskegee Airmen and having that rush. So when you met them, or when you had the opportunity to experience that, if you allow me again to call it a rush, did that inspire you to at that time go to the Air Force, or were you already in the Air Force? I may have missed that part.
I was already in the Air Force at that point.
Okay. And as training go, and as the Tuskegee Air persons go, were there any that were influential, speaking with you personally, or just their presence there that inspired you to follow suit?
It was their presence there, but I did get to speak to some of them personally. One was Lee Archer. Lee Archer was he was the first, I don't remember if he was the only, but he was the first African-American ace in World War II. So he was the first to shoot down 5 enemy aircraft, which to become an ace is a big deal. There's not that many in the history of aerial combat, right? So talking to Lee Archer, there was also a Lieutenant Colonel Carter, who he was very influential. He would come to the Air Force Academy. Also, he would go to the training school, the officer training school there at Maxwell Air Force Base, and he was kind of a constant there. So those 2 gentlemen were 2 of the most influential that I was able to meet one-on-one.
Wow. Now, you also alluded to the fact that you live approximately 5 minutes away from Barksdale Air Force Base, and you hit very eloquently about the fact that it was thought of, and sadly, some of our MAGA people are still trying to profess that about they would be afraid to fly on a plane with Black pilots and that kind of thing. And you hit the area when you were sharing that obviously it was said that we weren't smart enough to be able to navigate the academics. So what gave you the impetus? And I'm asking this sarcastically, but I already know the answer, and I'm just because I have a lot of young viewers. What gave you the impetus to feel that you had what it took to pursue that career?
Well, that's one was my experience in church, right? We had a theology in church that taught us that you can do all things through Christ Jesus who strengthened you, right? And we use that meditation, that scripture, that belief to overcome any insecurities that we had. My upbringing from my parents, they taught us that no one is better than you, right? Anything you put your mind to, you can do, right? And the other thing was the history of trying difficult things and finding that I could do them and succeed at them, right? So yes, I knew pilot training, becoming a pilot was not easy, but all of those things coming together had me to believe that if I worked hard, I had the opportunity. I had examples in the Tuskegee Airmen, right, that made it through in a much more difficult environment than I had. So I was confident, I believed that I could make it through. And thank God that I did, because not everyone makes it, white or black.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, speaking of that, did you encounter any obstacles that obviously were not, and dare I say, obstacles that were just presented because of what you were doing, but obstacles that were presented because you were not supposed to be able to do what you were doing because you did not fit into the stereotype that had already been put forth prior to the Tuskegee Airmen?
A little bit. And some of the, there was no, I would say, overt racism that I could see that it wasn't the same as when the Tuskegee Airmen came through, right? But it was, I think people had some preconceived notions, some of my instructors, when I got there. So if you expect someone to fail or to not be as good, then you look for things to justify your belief, right? And I think some of that bias came out once I had an instructor, we was having a conversation, and I did pretty good academically at the academy, which is a very challenging academic environment. He was also an academy grad, and I did substantially better academically than he did when he went to the academy. And his statement to me was, how did you graduate with that GPA? Right? Like anybody else, I'm smart and I worked hard. Right? And that's how I graduated with that GPA. So it was those type of biases that you knew people had. And at times it would come out. And it was more overt than covert. Okay. One of the challenges I will say at Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training, when I got there, I was the only African-American student.
Wow.
That was it.
Okay.
About halfway through, we had another African-American student come in, but he didn't make it through. He washed out. So I got there. I'm the only African-American student. I believe there was 2 African-American instructor pilots there. All the rest of them were Caucasian. Of course, Euro-NATO Joint Jet, we were mixed in. We had pilots and students from Norway, Italy, a few Brits there, but Turkey, different countries from across the ocean. They had students and instructors there, Germany being another one.
Well, very interesting. Now, I noticed here you were deployed several times, and during your time of being deployed, were you at the, and I don't see this here, that's why I'm asking this question, Lieutenant Colonel, did you have a family at that? Well, obviously you had mom and dad, but, and the reason I'm asking this question, maybe I should back up a little bit. The reason I'm asking this question is because coming from a heavily clad military family myself. I never served in the military, and I have people in the military right now. Matter of fact, our son was in the Navy. But anyway, that's not my show tonight. It's your show. What did the was your family comfortable, uncomfortable to hear that you were being deployed in a war zone, that kind of thing, or were they just kind of accepting of the fact that that came with the territory, if you were in fact in the military?
About the time I deployed, they were accepting to that fact. For one, my wife was also active duty, right?
Yeah.
So she was in the military also. I met her at the Air Force Academy.
Okay.
After we had our first daughter, she separated so that one of us would be home with the kids. So they were very accepting. Of course, I come from a praying family, so I'm sure all that prayer helped to comfort them a little bit. I even remember that first deployment, one of my aunts at a cookout, she laid hands and prayed over me. She said, Lord, bring him back with all the arms and legs that he left with. I will never forget that prayer. But that prayer helped to my family, I believe, to provide them comfort while I was away.
Wow. Listen, perfect segue. Let's talk a little bit about the ministry and moving into the ministry. And I know that I read earlier that you were involved, excuse me, with the church earlier, and you just finished sharing about the prayer that came from your family and your auntie. I wanted you to return with all the arms and legs and everything intact. So, as ministry having an impact in your life, was there ever a time that before actually accepting, we, especially in our culture, people will talk about answering the call.
Mm-hmm.
Was there ever a time when you were reluctant about answering the call to the ministry as a pastor? Maybe I should be specific.
In fact, when I first answered the call, I did not think I was going into pastoral ministry.
Okay.
Right? I didn't see myself as a pastor. I thought maybe, I would go off, I would become that lawyer, doctor that had a big paycheck, made a lot of money, and every once in a while someone would invite me to preach, or maybe I would do a revival and then go back to my job. So the pastoral ministry really didn't come for me until about 2005. That's when that part of the ministry, I knew I was called, but how I was to practice that ministry, what office, I wasn't sure about. In about 2005, it became clear to me that God had called me to pastor, and not only to pastor, but it was to be full-time for me at some point. That's the ministry I would step into.
And in the process of stepping into that ministry, because there are a lot of questions many times with individuals that are in the ministry that are Christians, that feel very strongly that they have, if I can say, quote, a calling, unquote, but many times there are trepidations as to should I be in the pulpit, should I not be in the pulpit? That's not what I feel like I should be doing. However, I know that I need to work with individuals to try to help them, let's say, for lack of a better word, get their lives together and maybe seek Christ. When you work as a practicing pastor, do you encounter people that sometimes have those trepidations, or do they take time to express that with you, or they just kind of not even address it?
I've had some that have those trepidations, whether it be ministry or an office, whether they serve in a church. The way I answer that question when asked, if it's not clear to you where you need to practice ministry and what office you are called to practice ministry in, do something, right? To do something is better than doing nothing. And in your doing something, it may be clear to become clear through the practice and the leading of the Holy Spirit that this is not the place where I should be practicing ministry. Well, you at least know that's not the place, and you probably did some good while you were practicing in that area. But just don't sit waiting for clarity to come. because oftentimes we get clarity in movement. We get clarity when we are actually practicing in some aspect what we should be doing, right? It's kind of like if you don't know exactly where you're going, right? At least point in the right direction and start walking there. Even if you don't know the address, you know the address is in Dallas, turn toward Dallas and start walking, right? And as you get closer, maybe you will get more clarity on where it is you're going, but at least get it and start walking in the direction.
Thank you for that. But listen, all of us have heard, we read the Bible, people talk about, it says study to show that I self-approved, that kind of thing. And being a brother that has gotten long in the tooth, I've heard, some of the older ministers, even when I was a boy, et cetera, and people, even now, people debate about needing seminary, not needing seminary. And I see you went to Phillips School of Theology and at the Interdenominational Theological Center. What would be your advice, as you've already shared, even if you're not sure, and you've told them at least walk in that direction, at least start there, do something, and there's a reluctance to get some might I say academic prowess in the ministry. What would be your suggestion to those individuals?
First, I know my perspective is if you can get education in whatever you're doing, not just ministry, if you can get more educated and more knowledge in whatever you're doing, do it, right? Mm-hmm. So that also applies to ministry and the seminary. However, you have to have opportunity, time, and the finances to go to seminary. Seminary is not cheap. If you can create the opportunity, the time, and the finances, go and get that knowledge. If you cannot, seek other ways to become more educated. There are certification programs that you can take, both in person and online, that are a whole lot cheaper than going to seminary, right? If you can't even go that far, find you a seminarian that went to the taste of seminary that you thought you or think you might want to go. Say, hey, what books would you suggest based off what you learned in school should I read, right? And start a reading list. And that's to a certain point, a form of self-education. Even better if you had some brothers and sisters that you can get in there and you can talk to and debate with, disagree, agree on some things to feed that knowledge and get those intellectual juices stirring.
And, Elder, the reason I asked that question is because often we encounter individuals that to this day like to have, quote, that I'll call it an argument as to, well, but God, the good Lord called you and he's prepared you and this, that, and the third, and I don't need to go to school. And so I often wonder, and I guess this is personal for me. I often wonder, and you've hit all the buttons, is how, if we say we are indeed called to the ministry, if we say we are indeed to lead people from that pulpit, some people like to get fancy and call it the sacred desk and that kind of thing, and then we can reject knowledge to be able to impart. What would you say to me if I was that person? I'm not. I say publicly I'm not, but what would you say to me if I was that person?
If you accept the call to ministry, you also accepted the call to prepare, right? And that preparation is educating yourself in one form or another. Mm-hmm. Especially when you look at you take what's in the Bible and how you apply it today in a relevant way, right? When we preach, we're just not up there to make people shout, get them glad and happy, and they go home with no life application to what they've heard, right? In seminary, in a lot of ways, especially the Phillips School of Theology at the ITC, it helped me with that, right?
Mhm.
And when it comes to liberation theology, how does this apply, especially to the African American community today, compared to how some of the other denominations, Southern Baptists, apply what's in the Bible, and how it was used and misused to either oppress a people or liberate people. Same Bible, used for two different purposes.
Okay. Now, Elder, this question may be a little sensitive and you don't have to answer if you don't want. But again, when we talk about ministry, when we talk about growing individuals, when we talk about recommending books to them, when we talk about recommending, going to these various theological seminaries and that kind of thing, I've often, again, and I'm being honest with you, always wondered why, and that's why I say it's a sensitive question. Many of the older ministers, and I know this, you may not want to answer this question, we have a propensity not to really help push forward the younger men, or what we might call the son of the house or whatever. And so my question is there a fear that the individual might perform better than expected? Is there a fear that the individual might actually say something that they didn't say? I mean, I don't know what your experience has been, and that's why I wanted to ask you this question, because I've just as I said, as an observer like yourself, have been in church all of my life. I noticed that sometimes. I notice a lot of things people don't notice, because sometimes I just sit and I watch, and they say, "Man, I didn't know you talked that much." That's why there was nothing for me to talk about, because it wasn't my show. So I know that's a loaded question, and I know it's a long question, but have you noticed a lot of that, or have you noticed it marginally, where the older, more experienced pastors are reluctant, is probably what I should say, to actually allow the younger gentlemen that are striving to improve themselves in the pulpit, the reluctance to assist them and to allow them more platform, I'll call it platform time.
Yeah. I have seen it on occasion. I wouldn't say that's, at least from my perspective, it hasn't been widespread, and it's that whole issue of pride, right? And we like to build our miniature kingdoms. And sometimes we forget what we are doing is not about us, right? It's about God. It's about Jesus Christ. It's about people getting saved. It's about the ministry. It's about the people. It's not about us. So if God sends a young preacher to my church and he or she is a better preacher than I am, let's celebrate their gift, right? There's still room in the kingdom of God for Sam to work his gift, even if he is not the best preacher in the house, right? And I'm okay with it. And I'll tell you, one person, if you hung around her, Reverend Linda Baker of the Minden District, she just recently retired. Her last church was Brack's Chapel. She was great at that, right? She would encourage you. She would lift you up. She would try to create opportunities. I've seen her create opportunities for other preachers in her church. And she told me one day, "Sam, I know who I am, right? I'm still going to be the same person. I know my gifts. So if I know my gifts, I'm not going to suppress someone else's," right? So we should celebrate people and the gifts that God granted them, because in the end, all of our focus should be the same, and that's building the kingdom of God.
Absolutely. And allow me to say, as you mentioned, Reverend Baker, and she sings beautifully. She has a God gift of she sings beautifully. But listen, before I let you go, I know you're really busy. Last question, promise you. When it comes to being in the ministry and family, we know that there are challenges in the family, just challenges because they're challenges, in the marriage with children and that kind of thing. And again, having been a young man that was in church all of my life, even when I wasn't forced to go, I know you have four daughters, and you've mentioned them, and let me call them by name. You've already mentioned. Well, I have Naomi and Rahima and Hannah and Hope, and we know how cruel people can be sometimes when the father is a pastor and that kind of thing. Are your babies, or do your babies ever experience discomfort with people that want to? I always call it jealousy, quite honestly, and try to discourage them from being active in the church because the pastor is a minister. Because today I say pastor is a minister because dad is a pastor.
Well, we've been my first church. They were glad to have young people walk through the door, that noise within the church, and they gave them room, right, to express their gifts. So we didn't experience there, and it's been pretty much the same at Evening Star. They've played. My oldest daughter, she was the musician for second and fourth Sundays. My daughters, they sung in the praise team, sometimes with the choir, depending on where it is. What to that question, what I have noticed is I have raised my daughters to speak their mind in a respectful way, right? To not be reserved simply because you're the youngest person in the room, right? Because I didn't want this power distance, this culture of power distance to follow them to, they say children are to be seen and not heard. I hate that saying. I absolutely hate it, right? Because what happens is they grow up and they take those insecurities with them, right? So when they sitting in the boardroom and the boss, the president of the company is there, sometimes that I'm here to be seen and not heard creeps up. And I didn't want that for them. Well, some adults that are not accustomed to hearing young people give an opinion, they take that, just the fact that they're speaking up, as disrespect. Okay. So they've had to navigate that in certain areas and learn how to deal with that dynamic with people when they don't want to hear what you have to say, not because you don't have anything to say, but simply because you're young. So that's
Thank you. Thank you. I want us to get that out there. As I said, I have quite a few younger individuals, and I wanted you to get that out there. Many of them are churched. Some of them are not churched, and they come from Christian homes, and like a lot of us, they come from homes that are having some issues with church and Christianity and all that kind of stuff. So I just want them to grow a little bit. Now, Elder, I see we have a gentleman, Brother Jeffrey Ricketts. I'm sorry. Go ahead, brother.
Absolutely. Hey, thank you for sending out the invite. I think I kind of saw it on Facebook. So, me and Sam will kind of go way back. So I know him and I'm like, man, I need to log in here and just hear what he have to say. But no, I just appreciate it. And then great point, Sam, as far as, teaching your daughters. And I would even go as far as say, I know you got daughters, but even young men. Because it kind of fall in that same situation as far as young African American kids seen and not be heard. And I think that's something that kind of plague our culture. And it doesn't matter where you're from. I'm original from Jamaica, and that's kind of the same mentality when I was coming up out there. So, and you're so right. And now you got to retrain something, at least for me personally, you got to retrain my mind and just some of the way that I was raised up. Not saying my folks did anything wrong, but it's just they didn't know, right? And sometimes you don't know what you don't know. But it's so good that we got to empower our that next generation and our kids just to be bold and courageous. So thanks.
Thank you, my brother, for being here. So, Lieutenant Colonel Elder Samuel Mckinsey, it's been great having you here. You have any parting words for us, sir?
Don't let fear stop you. Whatever it is that you're going to do, if you have to do it scared, do it scared. Because that is one of the biggest obstacles that keeps people from reaching their full potential. Whether it's the fear of failure, right? Was the fear that I'm not good enough? Whatever it is, don't let fear be the limiting factor. Fight through it. You can do all things through Jesus Christ, who strengthens you. And that includes overcoming fear. I will say that's the biggest lesson I learned early that helped me to be successful in life was not to let fear stop me from taking steps.
Fantastic. Okay, guys, you heard it here. Lieutenant Colonel Elder, Presiding Elder, let me make that correction. He's Lieutenant Colonel Presiding Elder Samuel Mckinsey. So guys, listen, as you know, this has been the Nobody Ask Me Guy show. I'm your host, Melvin Casey Lars, and as always, we ask you to go to our YouTube channel, the Nobody Ask Me Guy show, and check out our videos, guys. Give us a like and also subscribe to the channel. It's been great. We'll be back on next Tuesday. And for my regular guests, you know how we do it here. We don't waste time. So we want you guys to come back. Elder Mckinsey, it's been great. Brother Ricketts, it was great having you. Elder Mckinsey, we want to thank you very much for your time. And we look forward to talking with you again, sir. So you guys have a great night. And God bless.